In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, October 13th, here in South Korea. Air raids continue to target Gaza as Israeli authorities vow to, quote, wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. Also, the number of casualties soars past 10,000 on both sides. On the local front, the South Korean economy is noting a tangible ease and slowdown with a rebound in manufacturing production and a lower retreat in exports. But the fresh fighting in the Middle East looks to complicate matters. Elsewhere in the U.S., consumer prices accelerate at a slightly faster pace than earlier projections to post an annual rate of 3.7% in September, keeping inflation under the spotlight for policymakers there. We start yet again in the Middle East, where ordinary Israelis and Palestinians continue to bear the brutal brunt of armed confrontations between Israeli forces and Palestinian militants. Now, pundits project the number of casualties, which of course would include the losses of lives and the number of those injured, at over 10,000 on both sides. Our Moon Hye-ryun reports.
The death tolls in the fighting between Israel and Hamas continue to rise. Following the Hamas attacks on Israel last Saturday, Israel has launched thousands of airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, with the Israeli defense minister saying that they would wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. As of Thursday local time, the death toll in Israel has come to around 1,300, while Gaza authorities reported that the number of deaths in the Gaza Strip came to over 1,400. Including injuries on either side, the number of those who have been injured or killed has breached the 10,000 mark. Amid the conflict, the United States delivered a message of solidarity through its Secretary of State during his visit to Israel.
You may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, but as long as America exists, you will never ever have to. We will always be there by your side.
Antony Blinken is due to continue his tour of the Middle East by visiting Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in a bid to put further pressure on Hamas to release the hostages taken on Saturday. With at least 25 Americans reported to be killed in the Hamas attacks, the U.S. is ramping up its support with plans to provide more monetary funding, as well as preparing a visit to Tel Aviv from its Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on Friday. In addition to showing support for its allies, the Biden administration has also stopped Iran from accessing the $6 billion of frozen Iranian money from banks in South Korea in its deal for the release of American citizens a few weeks ago. Crude oil exports from Iran may also face sanctions from Washington to cut off revenue after it reportedly provided Hamas with weapons and military training. While NATO officials have said that they do not expect the alliance to become directly involved, many countries other than the US have offered Israel military aid following a meeting between defense chiefs on Thursday. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the government here is scheduled to send aircraft to Israel to accommodate Koreans there seeking to return home. The plans to this end were shared by the South Korean embassy in Israel, and flights here may depart for Israel as early as this evening. Koreans on both short-term as well as long-term stays in Israel can sign up for these flights on the embassy's website. Korean Air is also poised to provide flights to Dubai for Koreans who fled to the UAE from Israel. There are currently over 700 Korean nationals in Israel. Up next, my colleague Park Gun-woo covers the potential repercussions of the violent confrontations between Israel and Hamas on both the global and Korean economies. Do take a listen.
Global economic uncertainties are stemming from the recent clash between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas. In an interview with Bloomberg TV on Wednesday local time, Hita Gopinath, first deputy managing director of the IMF, said that broader conflict between Israel and Hamas could possibly threaten the global economy through inflation. Based on the IMF's modeling, she added if the conflict gets bigger and oil prices rise 10%, it would also cause inflation to go up about 0.4 of a percentage point 1 year later. But she also noted it's too early to predict exactly how broad the implications would be. Meanwhile, one expert noted how little of impact there has been so far on oil prices.
The oil price, initially it went about 4% right after the incident, but it came down to the pre-conflict level. So the oil price so far is not the issue. So far, I will say that the incident, Hamas incident, has not had a significant effect upon Korea as well as on the global environment.
However, another expert warned about what could happen to the Korean economy if the Israeli-Hamas war continues longer.
If the war continues, global economic uncertainties will rise, leading to a deeper global recession, and this could negatively impact Korea's trading and the country's economy.
The Bank of Korea recently announced that exports are projected to improve in the fourth quarter, but the Israeli-Hamas conflict could now hinder things in that regard. Also, following concerns about energy supply during winter, South Korea's second vice industry minister Kang Kyun-sung on Thursday met with gas company executives to discuss the issue. He told them that the government will cooperate with the gas industry to balance the supply and demand of gas, especially during winter. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
In other news, North Korea is on pace to deploy nuclear-armed ICBMs that could challenge U.S. missile defenses. The grim observation was shared in a report by the U.S. Congressional Committee on Strategic Posture on Thursday local time. The report also warns of a potential seventh nuclear test by North Korea and that its chemical and biological weapons programs continue to raise much concern. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is expected to remain committed to advancing the regime's nuclear arsenal as a centerpiece of his security structure. Seoul's finance ministry has stressed the ease in Korea's economic slowdown in recent times, but has shared concerns about the potential economic implications of the fresh conflict in the Middle East. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
South Korea's economic slowdown is easing, according to the finance ministry's latest Green Book released on Friday. The ministry's description of the country's economic slowdown has changed to gradually easing from the previous report's partially easing. This is mainly due to signs of a rebound in exports and manufacturing production.
Despite uncertainties like increased global oil price volatility, the slowdown in our economy is gradually easing into recovery. A rebound in exports and manufacturing production, including semiconductors, an improved services sector, and sustained employment growth have contributed to a mitigation of the economic slowdown.
The manufacturing production index in August increased by 5.6% from the previous month, marking a rise for the first time in 3 months. Particularly noteworthy was the significant rebound of 13.4% in chip industry. Exports in the third quarter decreased by 9.8% on-year, the lowest decline since the fourth quarter of last year, when exports began to decline on a quarterly basis. The government continues to see a cool down in inflation, but pointed out the increased volatility in global oil prices as a concerning factor. The government also expressed optimism about the increase in tourist numbers, citing last month's on-year growth of over 800% in the number of Chinese tourists visiting South Korea. On the other hand, it evaluated that uncertainties still remain due to the war in Ukraine and the outbreak of military conflict in the Middle East, as this could lead to more volatility in raw material prices. In response, the government plans to improve people's livelihoods, including controlling inflation by managing risks from both home and abroad. It also expressed its commitment to boosting domestic demand, investment, and exports while improving the economic structure. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, findings for the month of September show employment here in Korea expanded remarkably on year. Our An Sung-jin has the numbers.
According to Statistics Korea on Friday, 28.7 million people were employed in South Korea in September. That figure is an increase of more than 300,000 compared to the same month the year before. It's the first time since June that the on-year increase rate has exceeded 300,000 after the figure dipped to the 200,000 range in July and August. The employment rate last month reached a record high for any September since records began being compiled in 1982. The rate was mainly driven by workers in their 30s, who saw an on-year increase of 1.5 percentage points, and those aged 60 and above, with the figure for that group rising 0.9 percentage points from last year. However, youth employment has continued its decline for the 11th consecutive month, with an on-year decrease of 89,000 for the 15 to 29 age bracket. An official from Statistics Korea attributed this to high youth employment last year and decreased population in that demographic, emphasizing the need to focus on the employment rate rather than the number.
The number of people employed last September was high, and although that number decreased, it was due to the base effect. Also, a basic change in population structure should also be taken into consideration.
Looking at individual sectors, employment in the healthcare and social assistance sector, as well as accommodation and restaurant services, saw an increase, while manufacturing and wholesale and retail sectors saw a dip.
Not all manufacturing sectors are seeing a decline. Though digital products and metal processing are decreasing, the automotive and medical sectors are continuing to show an increasing trend in employment.
And unemployment figures dropped to the lowest for any September since 2009 to 660,000. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., consumer prices there accelerated slightly faster than expected in September, keeping inflation a centerpiece for policymakers. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
According to the latest data released Thursday by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. consumer prices remained high in September due to rising gas and rent costs. The September Consumer Price Index rose 3.7% on-year, holding steady with August's on-year gains, but slightly higher than economists' expectations of a 3.6% rise. On-month, inflation was up 0.4%. Statistics also show that the Shelter Index, which is largely a measurement of rental leases, as well as the implicit rental value of owner-occupied properties, accounted for 70% of the monthly core increase and more than half of the overall monthly increase. If the rise in shelter prices is removed from the overall CPI, core CPI rose just 0.1% for the month and is up 2% on year, the lowest annual increase that the index has recorded since March 2021. Also, food price inflation is at its lowest rate since March 2021, matching the month's on-year rise of 3.7%. It also marks the first time since early 2022 that food prices did not outpace overall inflation. Meanwhile, U.S. stocks sank on Thursday, ending a 4-day streak due to the unexpectedly high inflation reading, which sparked concern about higher interest rates by the U.S. Fed before the end of the year. The Dow Jones Industrial Average shed 0.5%, with the tech-heavy Nasdaq also sinking 0.6% on the day. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, Korea ranks 6th out of 62 countries for its artificial intelligence industry. Now, this is according to UK data company Tortoise Media that was shared by the Federation of Korean Industries earlier on this Friday. The latest ranking is also 2 places higher compared to that in the year 2019. The company also claims Korea holds the most AI-related patents after the US and China, but by company, Samsung ranked number 1 for the total number of patents registered. A number of relatively smaller communities beyond the metropolitan areas of Korea are seeking localized efforts to breathe fresh life into their respective economies and to keep them thriving. My colleague Lee Soo-jin was out and about.
South Korea's towns and villages outside of Seoul are in danger of dying out. To try to prevent this, some areas are trying to revitalize themselves through loconomy, which involves businesses and products that reflect a region's unique characteristics. An expert said that spurring the local economy by attracting visitors with loconomy can help local businesses keeping the area alive.
It's important to make sure that people living in the area want to stay there. Trying to directly increase the population is unrealistic.
One place that has already been successful in using loconomy to draw visitors is Yangyang-gun County. Originally a small fishing village, it promoted a feature that made it unique: beaches that are ideal for surfing. Its surfing population has been steadily increasing, with nearly 470,000 visitors last year. And the economic impact of its surfing industry was estimated to have almost tripled last year compared to 2019. There are other places like this neighborhood in Incheon. They're highlighting their unique qualities in a bid to vitalize the local economy. Kaeong was once a bustling port area, but many began leaving the neighborhood in favor of more modern areas. A local group decided to save it from dying out by emphasizing the very characteristic that many saw as a problem. Its old-fashionedness, also reflected in the old corner shops scattered across the village.
I believe that once Kaeong's economy improves and the old corner shop owners make money, they'll pass on their businesses to their children, and then the neighborhood will have a lasting history.
So instead of demolishing these shops, their old-fashionedness was promoted through galleries and social media to attract visitors, and this has already proven effective.
People from Seoul also began to place orders as they discovered my shop on one of their visits to Kaeong.
Keeping with the retro trend of the area, he also designed the vintage logo of the local beer, which began selling its own merchandise after he saw a rise in visitors from people who come just to drink Kaeong beer. While the locals are well aware that there is still much work to be done before Kaeong's revival reaches the level of places like Yangyang, both are a testament to how loconomy is creating real economic value. 이수진, Arirang News.
For the first time in 15 years, Jeollanam-do province is hosting the country's annual sports festival. Some 28,000 athletes here and around 1,500 Korean athletes from overseas will compete in 49 sports, including fencing and swimming. Among those in competition are swimmer Hwang Sun-woo and high jumper Woo Sang-hyuk. The opening ceremony takes place at 5:30 p.m. Korea Standard Time at Mokpo Sports Complex. The festival runs until October 19th. And there was a special christening ceremony here in the country this past Thursday to share the names of the twin pandas that were born here back in July. Our Iuni was at the event.
Everland, the country's largest theme park, has decided to name its twin baby pandas Ruibao, meaning wise treasure, and Huibao, meaning shining treasure. Announced on Thursday, the names were chosen following a public contest, which took place from August 24th to October 6th. A brief media day event was held the same day, where Everland zookeepers introduced the twins in front of the cameras and some invited guests, capturing hearts as they made their entrance. The firstborn, Ruibao, weighed 180 grams at birth, while the younger, Huibao, was just 140 grams. The twins now weigh over 5 kilograms, with the weight being put on in only 100 days.
We had never raised twins before, so we were quite nervous. However, watching them grow has made me happy, and it seems that many people following us on social media have also been very happy.
The twins' parents are Aibao and Robao, and the twins have an elder sister, Fubao, the first giant panda bred naturally in Korea. After the sensational birth of the twins, Everland ran the naming contest in which approximately 20,000 people participated, submitting more than 40,000 names. Out of the 10 finalists, 700,000 participants' votes finalized the 2 names, reflecting the popularity of the panda family. Considering that it is challenging for the mother Aibao to take care of both babies at the same time, the twins had to take turns being fed by Aibao and also being given formula milk. This is currently on a 10-day rotation. However, starting from around 4-month-old, when they start walking steadily, they will both be cared for by their mother.
They have now opened their eyes and are starting to grow their teeth. Once they start walking well, which is expected at around 4 months, they will return to their mother. And if they follow her well enough, they can be introduced to the public.
Coming together on such a meaningful day, my children were very excited, and I also felt very happy today.
Hopefully, the twins will have grown healthy enough to adapt to the external environment and be ready to meet the public next year. 이은희, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In France, police used water cannons and tear gas to break up a pro-Palestine demonstration after France issued a nationwide ban on such gatherings. The incident at the Place de la République on Thursday local time saw demonstrators with Palestinian flags chanting that Israel was a murderer. Authorities say around 3,000 people had gathered and that 10 were arrested. The ban was put in place by France's Interior Minister, Gerald Darmanin, who said that since the Hamas attack at the weekend, more than 100 anti-Semitic acts have been recorded and people have been arrested for trying to carry knives into synagogues. The minister has said that any foreign nationals breaking the rules will be deported. France has large Jewish and Muslim communities at around 500,000 and 5 million people respectively. In keeping with tradition, Britain's Royal Mint has revealed a new set of coins to mark the arrival of a new monarch. The new coins showcase King Charles III and his passion for nature conservation. All coins will feature the king's face on the head side. The tail side of different coin denominations will show various flora and fauna, including a red squirrel, an oak tree leaf, and bees, amongst others. The new coins will keep the size and shape of previous designs and are expected to enter circulation at the end of the year. Old coins featuring Queen Elizabeth II will still be accepted, while banknotes featuring the King's face will go into use in the middle of 2024. And finally, New York Comic Con 2023 has officially kicked off. The 17th edition of the annual pop culture event began on Thursday local time and is expected to draw in more than 200,000 people over the next 4 days. The opening saw a number of attendees enter the event at the Javits Center, dressed in a variety of costumes, from Buzz Lightyear to Batman. The convention will feature special exhibitions as well as panels with Hollywood A-listers, such as Chris Evans and Ewan McGregor. Comic-Con first started in 1970 in San Diego, California. It's since grown into an international multi-city event that showcases everything from comic books to movies and television. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We're wrapping up the week under cloudier skies today, and big temperature swings continue across much of Korea, with highs rising to the 20s this afternoon again. But overall, nice and calm weather. Highs are similar to yesterday. Seoul and Daejeon are having highs that are a few notches lower than yesterday at 22 degrees Celsius. Gyeongju and Busan see highs at 24 degrees. Then there's rain in the forecast for Saturday, mainly in central parts of the country. 5 to 40 millimeters of heavy rain in store, falling at 20 millimeters an hour at times with thunderstorms. So if you're planning outdoor activities, have an umbrella handy. An umbrella and jacket are what you need if you're in the capital area. Or you can change outdoor plans to Sunday, as sunshine returns on Sunday with warmer afternoon highs. Now, and the weekend's rain brings cooler air to the country next week under mostly sunny skies for most of next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Coming up next is our panel session to mark the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. Do stay with us. also remains committed to boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of this latest.
To discuss the current security environment.
The United Nations most powerful body on global security, expressing hope.
Stock markets around the world have taken a hit amid speculation that the US Federal Reserve
Arirang.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, look my way. Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Today, that is October 13th, the world marks the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. So what is the meaning of this particular day? What's fueling the frequency of natural disasters worldwide, including in Australia? And what can be done to better counter these callous calamities? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we explore efforts to ease the risk of natural disasters, which pundits believe are being aggravated by climate change. For more on this reality, I have Professor Yoon-Jin Ho at Gwangju Institute of Science and Technology live on the line. Professor Yoon, it's a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I also have Dr. Steve Lade at the Australian National University with us as well. Dr. Lade, thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon.
Professor Yoon, let's start then with a few details perhaps about the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction.
Yes, the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction was started in 1989. That's after a call by the United Nations General Assembly that we need a day to promote a global culture of risk awareness and disaster reductions. And since then, it's every 13th of October that today we celebrate how people and communities around the world are reducing their exposures to disasters and raising their awareness. One thing to mention is that at the Sendai, they have a Sendai framework for disaster risk reductions. A few catchphrases is that people-oriented and action-oriented approaches to disaster risk reductions.
Right, indeed. And keeping that in mind, then, Dr. Lade, what would you say is the significance of perhaps setting aside such a day?
It's an important opportunity to remind ourselves that disasters are common and that we all need to take action to reduce the risks associated with them. It's estimated that over 70,000 people died across the world last year from disasters, and nearly 200 million were directly affected. So it's a really important issue. The theme of this year's day is fighting inequality for a resilient future. This theme is designed to draw attention to the fact that inequality is a cause and a consequence of disasters. This means that to address the cause of disasters requires addressing inequalities. And then on consequence, a worst case scenario is that more frequent disasters may push an additional 100 million people worldwide into poverty by 2030. So the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction draws attention to the fact that individuals, communities and governments all urgently need to act to reduce inequality and thereby disaster risk.
Right. And Professor Yun, pundits warn that natural disasters are on the rise. Do you agree with them? And if so, how do you explain this rather disturbing reality?
Yes, basically I agree that as just mentioned, that our Earth has been warmed up and is likely to warm up in the futures. Then various types of disasters is likely to increase. Of course, we are still figuring out the exact cause and effect, but the general tendency is toward the more disasters. But the one thing to mention is that the natural disaster increasing is one thing, but the other thing is that the population itself is increasing. That means that the risk that people would face those type of disasters is also increasing. Another way to explain is that people want to live nearby coast, nearby beaches. That means that the risk to face like a high tide or the typhoon is also increasing. And I just mentioned that the disasters and inequalities are basically two sides of the same coins, meaning that each reinforce the others. So when the disaster happens, the inequality is increasing, and inequality is increasing, the impact of the disaster is likely to increase as well. So we have to consider all these type of, not only the natural issues, but also social issues to tackle the problems.
Right, it sounds like a vicious cycle right there. Dr. Lei, there have been rampant reports of frequent natural disasters, including fires and floods in Australia in recent years. What more can you tell us, and what do you believe is perhaps making Australia more prone to such calamities, if I may?
Australia's actually always experienced lots of natural disasters. Well, one of our famous poets, Dorothea McKellar, wrote about Australia as a land of droughts and flooding rains. As Professor Yoon indicated, climate change is unfortunately making these natural disasters that we've always experienced more frequent and more severe. For example, the wildfires that we had in early 2020 burnt a massive area, actually an area larger than the entire Korean peninsula. It destroyed over 3,000 buildings, killed 30 people, and is estimated to have killed over 3 billion animals. And then just 2 years later, we had devastating floods that killed 27 people and flooded nearly 30,000 homes. And just last week, we had some towns in southeastern Australia that incredibly had fires followed by floods on the very next day. The effects of climate change are also being compounded by the changes that have been made to our landscape over the last 2 centuries of European settlement. We've cleared a lot of vegetation, which makes floods more extreme. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, who have been here since well before Europeans, regularly burnt the landscape, which made it less susceptible to large fires. What's happening now is that while these burns are still occurring, they are less frequent, which makes large areas of forests more vulnerable to large fires.
Right, I see. Professor Yoon, generally speaking then, climate change is believed to be rendering countries more vulnerable to natural disasters. All that being said then, how high are the risks for such events here in Korea?
Well, South Korea and also Australia, we are really well-developed countries, very well-resourced countries. But yet, we have natural resource disasters and then the consequences. That's including human casualties. So compared to like 50 years ago or 30 years ago, we have a much more advanced infrastructures, technologies, and resources. But the one thing we need to know is all the regulation we set for like infrastructures was done in 50 or 30 years ago, meaning that, for example, like sewage systems, which handles the flow waters, that was the design back then. But then what happens as with the climate change is that the amount of precipitation that happens within an hour is likely to increasing. So meaning that in 50 years ago, we need this big sewage system. That's enough. But then right now, we are facing a new challenges because this bottom line is kind of slowly moving up, so that whatever happens in terms of floodings, that the chance to have a disaster is increasing as well.
Right, that sounds very grim. Meanwhile, Dr. Lathan, what efforts are underway in Australia to better counter natural disasters?
So I think the fires and the floods of the last few years have woken us up to the fact that we're facing threats that by their size and by their frequency are much more severe than what we've seen before. So some things that Australia has done has been to set up a national resilience task force, which has established a national disaster risk reduction framework to take a national approach to counter disasters, whereas approaches were previously at state or smaller scales. We've also established a national emergency management agency to respond to emergencies, help communities recover, and also prepare Australia for future disasters. The state of New South Wales has established a reconstruction authority to fund disaster preparedness, recovery, reconstruction and adaptation. For example, supporting people to move out of areas that are highly vulnerable to floods. There's an increasing public awareness of the intensity of these disasters too. For example, some landowners who previously might have attempted to stay and fight off an incoming wildfire now recognise that some fires are just too intense to fight. We're getting these phenomena where wildfires generate their own weather systems and it just becomes impossible for individuals to deal with. We also have research going on, such as at my university, that looks at providing better early warning systems and also the capacity to fight and put out wildfires very soon after their ignition before they get too big.
Right, good to know. And Professor, we've talked about how the risks also remain for South Korea with regard to natural disasters. And that being said, how prepared is Korea, including its public, to respond to natural disasters, do you think?
As I mentioned, that in terms of like infrastructures or technologies, I think we have a pretty good resources. But what we should do is we have to really rearrange those resources to better prepare those type of risk or the disasters. So, for example, I know that the people in South Korea nowadays that receive the message warnings said that, okay, it's likely to have a flood, that we are going to have more rains. But then sometimes, because it's too many warnings and people just don't pay too much attention to it, and then what people just maybe tend to say that, oh, it's that happens. The warning happened in the past, but we are okay, so we don't need to worry about this time. So we have to find a way that categorize those risks, and then how we send out the warnings to the people that will be affected by those disasters. So, for example, like these summers in Korea, we have a kind of series of the heavy rain events, and then some people may say, "Oh, this happened yesterday, so we are not going to have another big rains tomorrow or today." And then they just ignore it, or they may just be busy with something else. But what we should do is when the disasters or the risk is high enough, we in a way that enforce or force people just to be evacuated or not to go to certain areas. we have those technologies, just we haven't implemented those things yet, or we need to sort things out, which one needs to be done first, which one is high priority, less priority, and then how to categorize those things. So just to sum up, that I believe that we have certain technologies. We still need to have more, but we do have those. And what we have to do is we have to maximize utilizing those resources that we have right now.
Right, and setting our priorities straight, of course, and making sure that the public is well aware of the dangers that they may be exposed to as well. Dr. Lade, regarding the impact of climate change on natural disasters, what is its connection to earthquakes? Are these natural disasters occurring more frequently as well, or have they simply been receiving more media coverage, do you think?
That's a very interesting one, earthquakes and climate change. Earthquakes are, of course, caused by movement of the earth deep underground, so their relationship with climate change is certainly less direct than with the many other natural disasters that originate at the earth's surface. But research has actually shown that, surprisingly, there is a link between earthquakes and climate change. For example, in the Himalayan mountains, many more earthquakes occur during the dry months than the wet months. And this is because the weight of all the extra water that's on the land during the wet season pushes down on the Earth's surface and stabilizes it. Then when the water dries up, the Earth rebounds and becomes relatively unstable and more vulnerable to earthquakes. Climate change is likely to make the monsoons more intense and therefore increase the strength of this depression and rebound, and therefore possibly the frequency and intensity of earthquakes. Similarly, melting glaciers around the world are releasing weight off the Earth's surface and causing the ground in those regions to rise and potentially become more unstable. This could also lead to more earthquakes in those regions. But in those parts of the world that don't have monsoons and don't have large glaciers, we would expect little relationship between climate change and earthquakes.
Right, I see. Professor Yun, so we have a daunting task ahead with regard to taking action aimed at reducing disaster risk. That being said, and again, which earlier you mentioned about how South Korea needs to set its priorities straight and encourage its public to be more aware about the dangers of natural disasters, what other measures or more immediate measures do you suppose the government can take to better tackle this very sad reality?
I think before we talked about immediate actions, we can think about a long-term goals. The long-term goal is that we really have to tackle the climate change or global warming, so that we have to reduce the carbon emissions or the climate forcings back to, at least we have to control these warmings up to some degrees. So that's a long-term goal, and it cannot be done by Korea alone. It's an international effort, and we have to, but it cannot be done like 1 day or 2 days. It has to be, we have to target like a 2050 or 2060s to be more realistic, and we have to really achieve that. But then in the short terms is that the disaster is going to happen. That's the kind of given statement. So disaster is likely to happen. The next thing is how to prepare it. To prepare that, we have to have a more accurate prediction systems. That's like typhoons or the heavy rains and those things. We need to have those predictions. And then based on those predictions or even the very short-term forecasting, we have to send out the warnings, and then we just have to find a way to reduce human casualties and also economic damages. But priority has to go that the human casualty has to be reduced as much as possible. It's not like Australia's case, but South Korea, we do have fires when it comes to spring seasons, and then occasionally we have big fires along the east coast. So that that happens, we have to really evacuate people as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and then we set the boundaries to control the fires. So Just like that, we have to have a long-term missions or long-term goals or visions. And then in the short terms, the key priority has to be reducing human casualties. And I think that has to go along in a kind of a 2 years to prepare these disasters.
Right, indeed. And broadly speaking, Dr. Late, then, what do you propose to allow for an effective or resilient response to natural disasters?
I fully support Professor Yoon's response on this point. It's this classic combination that we always talk about in climate policy: adaptation on one hand and mitigation on the other. We need to acknowledge that we live in an increasingly dangerous new world, which means investing in disaster risk reduction, educating communities, developing early warning systems, funding our frontline responders, and building resilience to allow communities to recover from and adapt to disasters. But at the same time, we need to mitigate. We need to recognise that halting climate change will also stop the situation getting any worse than it is already. We need to stop emitting greenhouse gases through transforming our energy, transport, agricultural and economic systems. Down in Canberra, here at the Australian National University, where I work, I mentioned before, there's research led by Professor Marta Yebra to develop technology that will detect fire ignition as it's happening in remote forests and then deploy drones to extinguish the fires before they grow. That's a very exciting work. My own research focuses on how providing individuals and communities with lots of options to respond to disasters helps to build their resilience and reduce disaster risk. My research shows that it's dangerous to make response plans too precise and rigid and optimized to specific disasters, because we need that flexibility to adapt to the increasingly new and dangerous ways that disasters are behaving.
Right, indeed, of course. All right, then, Dr. Late, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Professor Yoon, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Right. Well, on that note, we end this week's editions of Issues and Insiders. Have a good weekend and see you same time next Monday.